So in this lesson, we're going to basically cover some of the most common and basic constructs. And now, constructs are really just a way of describing rhythmic ideas. We have things called, quarter notes and eighth notes and half notes and whole notes. I want to make it clear that I'm not trying to teach you how to read music. This is simply how we define a certain amount of time in music. In our real world, we have minutes and seconds. Okay, so if you wanted to make a correlation between them, you could say that a minute has 4 seconds in it. Okay, well, we're going to say a measure has 4 beats in it. And we're pretty much saying the exact same thing. And in fact, the only difference is that we can speed up and slow down musical time. We can make the beats really fast or not very fast. So we can speed it up and slow down. Obviously, we can't do that in the real world, but we can most definitely do it with musical time. So if you keep in mind that all we're doing is describing time going by. Now, we have quarter notes, which are what you might call the seconds. These are the most basic type of thing, or the most basic type of construct. And they're very, very simple. Now, before I start going into the examples too much, I want to show you that I am going to do all of these examples. I'm going to use a basic G chord. So if you look, you'll see that I've got, this is what I call a rock and roll G. Some of you might know a G like this, or it can be fingered like this. There's a lot of different ways, but this is the way that I like to play G. It's my middle finger is down here on the 3rd fret of the 6th string. My first finger is on the 2nd fret of the 5th string. The 3rd and 4th strings are open. I have my 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string, and I have my pinky on the 3rd fret of the top string. And when I do that, it's that sound. If you, what you may prefer is to do this type of G. This is, I call it a country G because it's more common in that style of music. In this case, I've removed my pinky and I've put my 3rd finger on just the 3rd fret of the top string. Either one of those will work. You can even use, a bar chord G if you prefer, but I don't really want to hold a bar chord for example after example after example. My hand will get tired. So that's the chord that I'm going to use to demonstrate all of these examples. So the very first example, example 1-1, is all quarter notes. Okay, so when we play quarter notes, first thing we have to do is you always have to count yourself in. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, and what that's going to do is that's going to set things up. And usually I'll get my right arm going at the same time. And the reason that I do that is because you'll notice that my right arm is going to kind of keep the time for me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to hit the strings there. That happens sometimes. So when I start playing quarter notes, they are literally going to last for this one beat. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to strum quarter note, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I struck a couple of strings on my way back up that one time. If that happens to you, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. It's just a little embellishment, I like to call it. Okay, so you can see that that's all there is to quarter notes. We simply do a down strum, and then we don't hit the strings on the way back up, and then on the next beat, we do another down strum. Now you might wonder what we do with those up strums in the middle. And if you look at the next example, example 1-2, you'll see that it looks like they are quarter notes, but they are connected in pairs. And these are called eighth note pairs. Now, eighth note pairs are half a beat per eighth note. So the pair of them together gets both the down strum and the up strum. And now we have to have something to call that space in the middle. It's sort of and a half, So even if we're playing quarter notes, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5. If we were counting seconds, that's kind of how we would count it. We'd say we have half a second between those notes. Well, obviously we don't have a half. We can't say and a half all the time, so we just say and. So then we get this kind of thing with all the eighth notes. It's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So at this point, you're going to want to make sure that you can actually do that. You want to be able to strum those quarter notes, as in the first example, and count them out loud. Now, you may have heard of a thing called a metronome, and right now I don't want you to use one. And I know that probably sounds odd if you've been taught your whole life to use a metronome. We're going to get to using a metronome a little bit later on, but right now I don't want you to use one because I really want you to learn to be responsible for keeping your own time, and that means verbally, as I was talking before. This makes all the difference in the world, and I don't know how else to put it other than I just have a lot of experience doing this, and I know it works. So you should be able to do that, 1, 2, 3, 4. When you can do that and it's comfortable, speed it up a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's probably going to be pretty easy for you, but it may not be. If you've never done this before, that could be a real challenge. So do whatever feels comfortable. When you get to where you can do it with the quarter notes, no problem, we'll move on to the eighth note pairs. So again, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you can't see it, but my foot is also tapping. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Okay? So that needs to be very steady, very much like clockwork. Okay, there's a thing called a swing that we're going to get to a little bit later. And the only reason I'm going to bring it up now is because some students naturally feel a swing. And it depends on probably what style of music you listen to mostly. But a swing, the ands are a little bit late. So it's kind of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 instead of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now, if you happen to notice that you're doing that, try not to, at least for now. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, then don't worry about it. But I want to point it out in case you find yourself doing a swing and you notice it, you can go ahead and start to fix it now. Okay, so let's move on and take a look at if we have the third example. We're actually going to mix the quarter notes and the eighth notes together. And we will get something like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So notice that on the quarter notes, I do a down strum and I do an up strum on the and where I don't hit the strings. And that allows the quarter note to ring out for the entire beat, as opposed to the eighth note pairs where I strum both the down and the up. So the quarter note I have quarter. Since they have two syllables, you can kind of work it out this way too. Quarter, eighth note. So sometimes instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, I'll do quarter and eighth notes. So I have quarter, eighth notes, quarter, eighth note, quarter, eighth note, quarter, eighth note. Now you want to try and keep that fairly consistent time-wise. I'm going pretty slow right now. You could speed it up and it'd be about like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and quarter, 8 note, quarter, 8 note, quarter, 8 note, quarter, 8 note. And it turns into something that you could actually play in a song pretty quickly. So that sounds pretty good. Now in the next example, we're basically just going to reverse them. So now we have an eighth note pair followed by a quarter, followed by an eighth note pair, followed by a quarter. Same idea. So let's first do it with 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now again, if I did the whole eighth note quarter idea, it'd be eighth note quarter, eighth note quarter. But I would prefer that you get used to doing the 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if I speed it up, it'll sound a little bit more like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, as I mentioned, I'm doing a this open G chord for everything. You could, if you want to switch chords and do E or D or A, it's totally fine. I'm just doing G on everything just because I don't want to think about chords, and I don't want you to think about chords either. I just want to concentrate on strumming right now. We're going to be changing chords all over the place in a little bit, but right now I just kind of want to concentrate on being able to just leave your left hand alone and just strum and not really worry about it, okay? So let's go on to the next example. And here we have kind of a variety. We've actually got 2 quarter notes and then 2 eighth note pairs. So again, nothing's really going to change. A quarter note is still a down strum, and you skip the up strum, and the eighth note pairs are still strumming on both. So there's really nothing to think about. So we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and. And if I do the quarter eighth note type of thing, it's quarter. Sorry, that's not how I would do it. Quarter, quarter, eighth note, quarter, quarter, eighth note. And if I speed it up a little bit, we'll pick it up. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4 and. Now sometimes you're actually going to hold a chord for longer than a single beat. Okay, that's why we have things called half notes and whole notes. Now half notes are equivalent to 2 quarter notes. If you're pretty good at math and fractions, this is all probably going to make sense. But a quarter note, remember, is strum down and miss the up strum. Okay? Well, if we do a half note, we've actually got a down strum, miss the up strum, and another down strum we miss, and another up strum we miss. So it lasts for 2 entire beats. So it's 1 and 2 and. And the reason I'm going to keep my arm moving is because I want this to keep the time for me. I don't necessarily want to have to think about whether or not I should strum down or up next. As long as this right arm keeps moving, it's always going to be in the right place. It'll be exactly where it needs to be. So if we look at example 1-6, for example, we have the half note, 1 and 2 and then we have quarter notes. 3 and 4 and. Now that doesn't sound like much by itself when it's that slow, but if I speed it up, you'll hear how it could definitely make sense. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Now if we take and we combine the half note with the quarter note and 2/8 notes, we get the next example, which is a half note again is 1 and 2 and, then we have the quarter note 3 and the 2/8 notes 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and again, when you're practicing this on your own, you should count it out for yourself, but make sure you count it out loud. So let's pick up the pace a little bit. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now in the next example, really all we're doing is just kind of switching around the order that these things come in. So now we have the quarter note first. So it's 1 and that's the quarter note. Now we have the half note. 2 and 3 and. Now I've counted 2 and 3 and because I always count to 4. If that is a real challenge for you, you could count 1 and 2 and to, you know, even though you're not technically on beat 1, you could do that. You could do 1 and for the quarter, 1 and 2 and for the half note, and then 1 and for the 8th note pair. I don't like to do that because I like to know what beat I'm on, and so I like to use the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and if at all possible, I encourage you to do it that way. If you find yourself getting confused on the count as you're going, just say any number. It's not important what number you say. It's important that you say a number. All right, so here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 again, you know, with half notes it probably doesn't sound like much at that pace, but let's pick it up a little bit and you'll see how it could definitely be used. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then in the next example, we're doing the same thing again. This time we've replaced that first quarter note pair with an 8th note pair. So now we don't have any quarters, just 8th notes and half notes. So we're going to get something like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and, there's the 8th note pair, 2 and 3 and is the half note, 4 and is the next 8th note pair, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now if you watched my introduction, you may remember I spoke a little bit about sort of a checklist. And I haven't really been demonstrating that checklist, but now that you kind of see what we've been doing, I think it's a good time to talk about it. The checklist basically is every time you strum, thinking about what it is you have to do. So for example, if we take example 1-9 that we were just doing, when I say the first step of the way is I'm going to say 1, I'm going to strike that first 8th note, and I'm going to play this G chord. So before I actually do any of that, I want to be sure to know exactly what I'm going to do. So I know that I'm going to strike the strings. I know that I'm going to strum down because my arm is here. And I know that I've got to fret the G chord, and I'm going to say 1 because that's the beat that I'm on. 1. Now I'm going to strike the strings because I'm on the second half of an eighth note pair. I'm going to say and. I'm still holding the chord. And I'm going to move my arm up because it's currently down. So, and. Now I'm on beat 2, so I'm going to say 2. My arm's going to go down because it's currently in the up position. I'm going to continue to hold this, and I'm going to strike the strings because I'm starting a half note. 2. So you can see I've gone through all these steps. Now I'm on the and of 2. My arm is down, so it's going to come up, but I'm still in the holding stages of this half note, so I'm not going to strike the strings. But my left hand is going to continue to hold the chord, so I'm just going to go and that's what I'm going to do. Now, like I said, that probably seems like a lot to do, and that's okay if it seems like a lot to do. You probably won't have to do all that stuff very often. In fact, I suspect that you won't have to do all that stuff very often at all. But if you find that in certain sections it gets complicated, that's exactly where you want to stop and break it down like that. And take your time. There's nothing in this section at all that says you have to go at a certain speed. You can go, you might be able to count 1 and 2 and then you have to stop and think, okay, 3 and 4, you know what I mean? So what's important is that you are assigning the right number to the right actions. You can think of, I often call time a framework upon which everything hangs. And if you can think of it that way, I think it really helps, because if you know, okay, on beat 3, I have to do this thing, well, then everything else that happens in that measure kind of centers around you doing the right thing on beat 3. And if there's something that has to happen on beat 1, and you do that thing on beat 1, and you do the right thing on beat 3, everything else sort of starts to fall into place pretty quickly. So please try and really pay attention to, okay, this thing happens on beat 1, this thing happens on beat 2, this thing happens on beat 3, this thing happens on beat 4, and take your time whenever you need to. If beat 3 is coming up, you can stop and think, okay, I got to do this, whatever, and then execute it. Don't be afraid to pause while you think of that next thing to do. I would rather that you pause, figure out what the next thing is going to be that you have to do, and then execute it correctly, than just sort of fly through the exercise hoping that you've done stuff at the right time. I hope that makes sense. So let's talk about the final construct, if you will, which is a whole note. And this is by far the easiest thing that you are going to play because it lasts for 4 beats. So it simply goes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. It takes up the whole measure by itself. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, to be honest, most of the time I use a whole note is at the end of a tune, or maybe there's a bridge section or something. We jokingly call them footballs sometimes, because if you see them in real music, the notation that I'm using in the book is what's commonly called rhythmic notation. And it's used a lot for notes that don't have a value on the staff. It's not an A or a B or a C or a D or anything like that. It's only showing time. And so it kind of looks like a diamond. But if you actually see a whole note, it looks a little bit like a football. It's not quite perfectly round. And so sometimes, if we're on the stage and somebody needs to tell somebody else, what's going on right now, it might be just play footballs. And what that means is just to hold chords for the whole measures. Okay, so the next thing to do here is to go through all of these different examples that we've just done. Make sure that you can execute them all. Make sure that you can count them at a reasonable tempo. Something around, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 is what I call a reasonable, comfortable tempo. There are a lot of very popular songs. We often use Brown Eyed Girl by Van Morrison as an example, or Margaritaville by Jimmy Buffett. These are songs that are sort of a regular, mid-tempo, comfortable pace. And believe me, there are hundreds of songs that go at about that speed. And we kind of use that as our baseline. You want to be able to go about that fast. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And if you can do all these examples at about that fast, I think you'll find everything from here on out will be pretty simple. So now for the last example in this lesson, we are actually going to take a lot of the things that we've done so far and put them all together. Now I'm going to use 3 different chords through this, actually even more than 3, but let's talk about the primary 3, which are going to be G, and I'm going to use again what I call the rock and roll G, a D chord. Now granted, this is not a full-blown chord course. I'm expecting that you can play some chords, but I'm going to go through the voicings that I'm using, and you'll also see the diagrams in the book if you need them. But this is the open D string, the 2nd fret on the 3rd string with my 1st finger, my 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the 2nd string, and my middle finger on the 2nd fret of the top string. So there's the D, and then I'm doing C is a chord I'm going to use here, which is my 3rd finger on the 3rd fret of the 5th string, my middle finger on the 2nd fret of the 4th string, the open 3rd string, my 1st finger on the 1st fret of the 2nd string, and the open 1st string. One little trick that I do a lot on this, particularly with strumming, is my third finger, you can't really see it, but it's barely touching the 6th string. So that in the event I accidentally hit that 6th string as I strum, you don't hear it. And that's a really awesome trick if you can get the hang of it. You just learn to kind of place that finger such that it does that for you and you don't get this. Which isn't technically wrong, but it just sounds kind of muddy. And with the D chord, you'll often see my thumb up here. It's doing the same thing. It's muting out that low E string in case I happen to touch it, and I'm just barely touching it with my thumb. Now you might wonder about the 5th string on a D chord. It's actually okay. If you do happen to hit that note, it is one of the notes in a D chord, and there's no way to really mute it, so you just kind of have to be careful. Now I also have the sort of country voiced G in here, as I mentioned earlier, where I'm only using the 3rd finger on the top end, but I'm also going to switch to a G7. So I'm just going to turn my fingers around, and I've got my 3rd finger on the low E string 3rd fret, my 2nd finger on the 2nd fret of the 5th string, and my 1st finger on the 1st fret of the 1st string. Now there's kind of a cool little thing. If I take this same voicing and I put my pinky on the 3rd fret of the top string, I get G. And what's kind of cool about this is that this G actually moves to C and back pretty easy. It's a little bit easier than turning the whole hand around. See, there's just a little bit less motion there. You can use whatever you like, but on something like this where I'm going to be going from C to G to G7 and back to C, I'd probably use that voicing, and it's pretty common. And then I'd go to my C, but then it's coming back to my rock and roll G, so I would leave it like that. And then we have an A minor, which is if you take C and you just move your 3rd finger to the 2nd fret of the 3rd string, you now have A minor. So that's actually a really easy change. And from A minor, if you just take your 3rd finger and put it on the 2nd fret of the top string, and your middle finger on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string, you get D7. So that 1st finger never had to change. And then you'll notice at the end of the measure, of the D7 measure, you'll see it kind of the end of that bar, the end of that measure has what we call an end repeat. It has the little 2 dots that face to the left. So that tells us that we're going to go back and start over. And I just wanted to point that out now while we're here. The bottom line of the music, we have another G, we have another C, and then we have a C minor. Now this is a bar chord, and I'll talk a little bit about how to finger it, because there's a couple of things here that are important. My first finger is obviously barring across the 3rd fret, going from the 5th string to the 1st. But if I was just learning this, I wouldn't start with that. The first thing that I would start with is actually the other 3 finger part. So I would put my middle finger on the 4th fret of the 2nd string, my 3rd finger on the 5th fret of the 4th string, and my pinky on the 5th fret of the 3rd string. And I would try and pluck just those 3 strings and make sure they come out. Now assuming they do, now if they don't, you might have something messed up. So, make sure you get them all nice and straight up, and make sure that those 3 can come out. And I'm just plucking the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd strings one at a time. I would then work on pushing on just the 5th string with my first finger. And at that point, because of the angle that my finger's at, it should touch the 1st string and kill it. So I get a clunk at the top. Now the other thing about this too is, again, my first finger is lightly touching that 6th string. So when I play this chord, I get a full chord sound. And if you're brand new to bar chords, I would call that good enough. Because the only other thing to it is to get the bar down the rest of the way to get that top string, which is just not that important. You get the full chord without it. So I just wouldn't even worry about it. Now if you really struggle with bar chords, you can actually leave that C minor out. You can just play C. You can continue to play C. This is just kind of a cool little thing I like to do. I call it the Beatles 4 chord. It's a common ending in like Beatles songs. So they go from a major to the minor, then back to the home bass chord. So those are all the chords that we're going to be using. Let's kind of walk through these rhythms slowly. You'll notice that the first 3 measures are all the same rhythm. It's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then in the next one we're going to switch to a D chord. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and we're going to stay on D for the first half of this measure. 1 and 2 and, but now notice that we're going to change over to a C on the 3, 3 and 4 and, now we're going to go to a G for the first 2 beats of this next measure. 1 and 2 and then I'm going to switch to my G7 for 3 and 4 and then we're going to go up to C for this next one, and now we have a different pattern. Now it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So at this point, let's go back to the beginning and do it kind of straight through, but at a slow tempo up through those first 5 measures. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and Then using that same strum back to G. This time I'm doing a rock and roll G, but if you want to do the open G, that's totally okay. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Then we're going to move to the A minor. Same strum pattern again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then up to the D7 with that same strum pattern again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now at that point we have our repeat dots, which you can see they have a match all the way back at the beginning of the tune. So let's pretend like we've just repeated. I'm going to do that whole first set of changes. We have 2 strum patterns. We have the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Or you may want to describe it as quarter, 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 8th note. And then starting at the 5th measure, we have the second strum pattern, which is quarter, 8th note, quarter, 8th note. I accidentally hit a string there. Let me do it again. Quarter, 8th note, quarter, 8th note. Which brings up a good point, which is if you do accidentally hit a couple of strings on your way back up or on your way down that you didn't intend to, don't let it trip you up. Just keep going. There's no reason to stop for that. Okay, so let's take it from the top. We're going to go through these first 8 bars or so, and then we'll finish out the end. So here it is, nice and slow. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. All right, so from there, we're going to go to, assuming that you have now played that 2 times, we're going to go to the G for a half note. 1 and 2 and, then 2 quarters. Quarter, quarter. And then we have C for 2 quarters. 1 and 2 and C minor for a half note. 3 and 4 and finally a G for a whole note. 1. And really, when you have a whole note at the end that way, usually that just means to kind of hold it out and wait. All right, so what you need to do now is basically just go through what I've just done, kind of play along with it a few times. Be sure to hit rewind and go again if you need to. I'm now going to play this 2 times. The first time, and I'll count it in both times so you get an idea, but I'm going to play this 2 times. I'm going to play it all the way through at a nice slow tempo. I'm just going to kind of make up the tempo. I'm not using a metronome. I'm just doing this nice and slowly. So try and play it along with me if you can. From there, I'm going to do it a second time at what I call a comfortable fast tempo, kind of how this would go if you were playing a real song like this. Okay, so let's give it a shot. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 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 2, and 3, and 4, All right, let's speed it up now. This is kind of going to be a nice, comfortable tempo. Exact same example. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. Repeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and there you have it. So, next step for you is to grab your guitar and try to play along with that, of course. Be sure that you can do the slow one very comfortable. Now, I will encourage you to play it along with me a couple of times, but more importantly, I will encourage you to play it not with me. One of the big things that we're working on here is to be able to keep your own time, and that means playing by yourself with only you keeping the time. So you can play along with me, and obviously I've provided a slow and a full speed version here for you to play with, but I encourage you to count it out loud on your own and play it not with me at all after you've done it with me a couple of times. I think that's really important. Okay? So go practice on that, and I'll see you at the next lesson.